In 1991, two hikers in the Italian Alps stumbled across something frozen in the ice that would completely rewrite what we thought we knew about ancient skin. A body perfectly preserved for over 5,300 years emerged from a melting glacier. Researchers named him Ötzi, and when scientists finally got a proper look at his skin under infrared light, they found something nobody expected: lines, dots, deliberate marks arranged in patterns across his lower back, his wrists, behind his knee. Ötzi wasn't just the oldest naturally preserved human body ever found. He was, at the time, the oldest tattooed human body ever found. And that single discovery raises a question most people never think to ask. If a man from 5,000 years ago was already covered in ink, how far back does this habit actually go? Let's start with Ötzi himself, because the details get stranger the closer you look. He had 61 tattoos, not random scribbles. Simple parallel lines and small crosses clustered specifically around his joints, his lower spine, and his ankles. For years, archaeologists debated what these meant. Were they decorative? Spiritual? Then someone noticed something. Modern medical imaging revealed that Ötzi suffered from joint degeneration in exactly the same spots where his tattoos were placed. Arthritis in the lower back, wear in the knee, strain in the ankle. The tattoos weren't randomly scattered across his body for show. They lined up almost perfectly with his physical pain. Many researchers now believe Ötzi's tattoos weren't decoration at all. They may have been medicine, a Bronze Age form of acupuncture marking the exact points on his body that hurt, possibly intended to relieve pain through some early understanding of pressure points. A tattoo 5,000 years ago might have functioned less like art and more like a prescription. Now here's a question worth pausing on. How does someone even make a tattoo without a needle, without ink, without sterilization, 5,000 years before any of that existed? Researchers studying Ötzi's markings believe they weren't created the way modern tattoos are, by puncturing the skin repeatedly with a single point. Instead, the evidence suggests small cuts were made directly into the skin with a sharp tool, and charcoal or soot from a fire was then rubbed directly into the open wound. As the cut healed, the dark pigment became trapped under the skin permanently. It's a brutally simple method, no needle required, just a blade, a fire, and someone willing to sit still through it. And that detail alone tells you something about how much this mattered to the people doing it. This wasn't a quick decision. It was a deliberate, painful, slow process, repeated 61 separate times on one man's body. But Ötzi isn't actually the oldest evidence we have. He's just the oldest preserved skin, and that distinction matters more than you'd think. In 2018, researchers re-examined two mummies held in the British Museum for over a century, originally excavated from ancient Egyptian sites. Using infrared imaging, the same technology that helped decode Ötzi, they found tattoos on both bodies that had simply never been visible to the naked eye. One mummy, a man, had markings depicting a wild bull and a Barbary sheep on his upper arm. The other, a woman, had S-shaped motifs across her shoulder and upper arm. These tattoos dated to somewhere between 3,351 and 3017 BC, older than Ötzi by several centuries. And here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. Until this discovery, archaeologists assumed tattooing in ancient Egypt was something women did, often associated with fertility rituals. The male mummy completely broke that assumption. The oldest tattooed Egyptian we've ever found wasn't a priestess. He was just some guy with a bull on his arm. So if tattoos existed independently in the Italian Alps and in ancient Egypt, separated by thousands of miles, that already tells you something. This wasn't one culture's invention that slowly spread outward. It looks a lot more like something humans kept arriving at on their own, again and again, in completely unconnected parts of the world. Which brings us to the absolute extreme end of this timeline, a discovery that pushes tattooing back further than almost anyone expected. In Siberia, archaeologists studying the Pazyryk culture uncovered mummified remains dating back roughly 2,500 years, preserved in permafrost so effectively that the tattoos were still visible without any imaging technology at all. Just skin, frozen in time. The Pazyryk tattoos weren't simple lines like Ötzi's, they were elaborate, mythical animals with antlers transforming into birds, deer with impossibly long curling horns, predator creatures locked in combat, covering entire arms and torsos in dense, confident artwork. This wasn't a culture experimenting with tattoos for the first time. This was a culture that had clearly been doing this long enough to develop serious artistic mastery. Whoever tattooed these bodies had real skill, which means the practice itself must have existed for generations before these particular mummies were ever inked. Now here's where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable to think about, because it forces a hard question. If we only know about Ötzi, the Egyptian mummies, and the Pazyryk burials because their skin happened to survive, what about everyone else? Skin is one of the least durable parts of the human body. It decomposes fast, under almost any conditions except the rarest combinations of ice, extreme dryness, or specific bog chemistry. For every tattooed body we've actually found, there could be hundreds, possibly thousands, that simply rotted away with their markings completely lost. Some archaeologists have proposed something called the tattooed Stone Age hypothesis, the idea that tattooing might have been far more widespread among prehistoric humans than the physical evidence currently suggests, and that we're only seeing a tiny accidental sliver of the full picture because skin almost never survives long enough to tell us the truth. There's actually circumstantial evidence supporting this. Tools discovered at sites in Europe dating back over 30,000 years, sharpened bone and antler points stained with ochre pigment, closely resemble tools later cultures used specifically for tattooing. We can't prove definitively that Ice Age humans were tattooing each other with these tools, but the design similarity is hard to ignore. It raises the possibility that tattooing isn't a 5,000-year-old habit. It might be a 30,000-year-old habit that we simply can't prove, because the skin is gone and only the tools remain. There's actually circumstantial evidence supporting this. Tools discovered at sites in Europe dating back over 30,000 years, sharpened bone and antler points stained with ochre pigment, closely resemble tools later cultures used specifically for tattooing. We can't prove definitively that Ice Age humans were tattooing each other with these tools. But the design similarity is hard to ignore. It raises the possibility that tattooing isn't a 5,000-year-old habit. It might be a 30,000-year-old habit that we simply can't prove because the skin is gone and only the tools remain. There's one more place worth looking, not for ancient bodies, but for living proof that this practice never actually stopped. Across the Pacific Islands, in places like Samoa, Tahiti, and the Marquesas Islands, tattooing wasn't an ancient relic that needed to be rediscovered by archaeologists. It survived, unbroken, as a living tradition passed down for thousands of years, using methods that would feel instantly familiar to Ötzi. Traditional Samoan tattooing, known as tatau, the word that English eventually borrowed and turned into tattoo, was performed using sharpened boar tusks or shark's teeth attached to a small wooden handle, tapped into the skin by hand, sometimes over sessions lasting weeks. The pain involved was not an unfortunate side effect. It was the entire point. In many Pacific cultures, surviving the tattooing process without flinching, without crying out, without asking the artist to stop, was treated as proof of the discipline and strength expected of an adult member of the community. The tattoo itself was almost secondary to what enduring it demonstrated. That detail connects back to something deeper about why humans might have started doing this in the first place, long before anyone wrote a word of history down. Pain, when it's chosen voluntarily and endured successfully, does something specific to the human brain. It triggers a flood of endorphins, and it creates a powerful, shared psychological experience between the person being tattooed and the people watching. Anthropologists studying rites of passage across dozens of unrelated cultures have repeatedly found the same pattern. Groups that put their members through a controlled, painful, voluntary ordeal together tend to bond more strongly afterward. A permanent mark earned through real physical suffering isn't just decoration, it's proof. Proof that you went through something real, that you didn't back out, and that the people around you watched you prove it. In a world without written contracts, without IDs, without resumes, a tattoo may have functioned as one of the only permanent, unforgeable records of who you were and what you had survived. So why would ancient humans go through the trouble of permanently marking their own bodies in the first place? especially without modern hygiene, modern needles, or any way to treat an infection if something went wrong? The most likely answer is that tattoos weren't one single thing. For Ötzi, they may have been medical, marking pain points on a body that had spent a hard life walking through mountains. For the Egyptian mummies, they may have carried religious or protective meaning. For the Pazyryk culture, intricate animal tattoos may have signaled status, identity, or spiritual protection in the afterlife, since these elaborate markings were found specifically on high-status burials, not ordinary ones. For Pacific Island cultures, they may have served as visible proof of endurance and adulthood. Across completely different continents and completely different centuries, tattooing kept reappearing as medicine, as religion, as identity, as initiation, sometimes as all four stitched into the same set of marks. What's left, after looking at the ice mummy in the Alps, the bull on an Egyptian arm, the antlered creatures frozen in Siberian permafrost, and the boar-tusk tools still used in the Pacific today, is a pattern that's hard to dismiss as coincidence. Humans, completely independently, in places that had no contact with each other, kept arriving at the basic idea that the human body wasn't finished the way it was born, that it could be marked deliberately and permanently, sometimes through real pain, to say something the rest of the world couldn't otherwise see. The ink fades over thousands of years. The skin almost never survives at all. But every time it does, by sheer accident of ice or sand or bog, or simply because a tradition refused to die, it tells us the same thing. This is one of the oldest decisions humans have ever made about their own bodies, and we were apparently making it long before anyone wrote it down.